Clear. Thinking about the question that has been a lot of people's minds for some years now, which is will the rule of law be able to triumph and hold Donald Trump accountable for his crimes? It's been very frustrating for a lot of people to see just how much this guy's been able to get away with. He was more successful at that than I imagined he could be. I remember thinking in 2017 that he's doing the stuff that worked out okay for when he was just the celebrity he used to be. But now that he's president of the United States and undergoing the kind of scrutiny that position, I thought, well, that's not going to work anymore. I thought he was going to come up against some aspect of the rule of law that would basically cut him off, but it didn't happen. It's amazing how much he's been able to get away with. I mean, nobody would have guessed, I don't think, in any of the years, first 70 years of my life, that you could pull off, attempt a coup d'etat to overturn an election. So right out in front of everybody, not all that hidden, really, pretty obvious what he was doing, that you could do that and then come away with the support of the main base of one of our two major parties. Nobody would have thought that. So holding Trump accountable has become sort of an intense battle. The rule of law has been closing in on Trump with 91 indictments and the civil suits and all that. But meanwhile, he's also, Trump is waging pretty open war on the system of justice that's trying to hold him accountable in a whole variety of ways that are very destructive to the rule of law. He's got tens of millions of people who believe that he's being targeted for political prosecutions. Somehow he's got people believing that and he has a lot of power as a result of that, including the wielding of potential violence. So we've got just frequently with these applications for gag orders on Trump. That's one of the places where the question is being, the battle is being fought and the question decided about will Trump be held accountable. Today there's the Alvin Bragg in New York apparently has gone for a gag order on Trump to protect all the kinds of people that Trump has been threatening, from witnesses and prosecutors, judges, and there's fear in this case because the jurors in the Manhattan trial apparently are not going to be anonymous. They want to protect the jurors. Here's one of the places where Trump has got some First Amendment rights that, some judges are going to have to weigh here. But Bragg is asking to basically to make sure that Trump is not allowed to talk about a whole lot of things which threaten with violence the rule of law. And Bragg has submitted a document, apparently, over 300 pages. It shows that Trump has got this big pattern of wielding the threat of violence to subvert the rule of law, including the insurrection and including threats to judges and such. So that's one place where there's some uncertainty about how the judge will will deal with the application for the gag rule. That's one of the little battlefields. And down in Mar-a-Lago, there's a showdown sort of emerging over this terrible biased judge, this Aileen Cannon, who was scathingly overturned even by a conservative court. By the way, she's been basically fighting for Donald Trump under the guise of being a judge. And the issue there, too, has got to do with basically protecting people who are involved in the administration of the justice in the Trump case. And that's got to do with Aileen Cannon has said, oh, the government's got to disclose all this stuff about whatever, basically to jeopardize the safety of witnesses. And there's a battle going on there, which is got some promise. I mean, I would love to see Aileen Cannon just removed from this case. I mean, when she got assigned this case after the absolutely atrocious, I mean, there should have been the end of her career, what she did with early parts of this documents case. She was overturned by Republican appointees in a scathing way for her obvious bias, failure to apply the law appropriately. And she apparently didn't learn her lesson. So what might be gathering here in this part of the Trump battle, I mean, the important thing is getting the January 6th related trial going. But there's a real chance people are seeming to increasingly talk about that if Aileen Cannon doesn't reverse herself, Jack Smith has got to take this to the 11th Circuit. And there's talk about 3 strikes and you're out. Like I think it's really clear, legally speaking, that Cannon applied the wrong principle to this situation. And it's well known in the field that she should never have required the release of what she's requiring the release of. So either she backs down on that, or if she doesn't, Jack Smith takes this to the district court, where she'll be smacked down again. And that maybe Jack Smith will ask to have her recused because of this grotesque pattern of bias in favor of the worst, most dangerous criminal in American history. Either she'll learn her lesson, but she doesn't show any sign that she's learned her lesson. Andrew Weissman is continually talking about how she's using every opportunity to delay that trial. I don't know how much if that trial ever does take place, and I do think that Trump is going to lose this election. I don't think he's going to be able to get rid of these indictments like he would if he won the election. What a drama we're involved with, we Americans. I mean, look at this incredible panorama of a battlefield in which the rule of law is battling against Donald Trump and the forces that he commands. That's another one big uncertainty. There's a whole battle about how fast can we get these things going, which is why people are so concerned about what the Supreme Court will do about getting the case back in Judge Chutkan's hands so things can progress and so we can get this important trial going and concluded with a verdict before people have to vote, and maybe even before the Republican and Democratic national conventions. There's a part of me that's really super involved with all that. I want just like the January 6th committee composed a brilliant uh, uh, television program over many nights, showing a lot of the American people a lot of the truth. Um, so also can these trials, and I think that just as the January 6th committee was um, composed from some very capable people, I think did a marvelous job with that whole presentation. I think Jack Smith is a superstar, and his team are superstars of playing their cards very powerfully. But it's at something of an abstract level, because I don't know how many people get into the legalities. But he's going to present a really strong case. He would, with the Mar-a-Lago case, we've already seen the indictment documents. This is going to be a real exposure. I don't know how much I'm hungry to have Trump exposed. I mean, um, when I ran for Congress in 2012, my campaign slogan was truth for a change. I mean, getting the truth out there is really a big deal to me. And that's before Trump. But I want people, the American people, to see as much as they can be shown um, the extraordinary and grotesque thing that Donald Trump is, and that the whole Trump party represents. But I think that I have to acknowledge that even though I am hungry for the January 6th trial to get prosecuted under Judge Chutkan and with Jack Smith running the prosecution and really laying out the whole sordid pattern of Trump's repeated and complex crime spree, all in an attempt to seize power against the will of the American people. And I think, well, isn't that already about as obvious as it could be? Is it going to have a big impact on the American electorate to have all that laid out in these trials? Will the people who need to be watching so that they can see what's really going on here with Trump and the Trump party, if they haven't seen it already, are they going to see it because there's a trial that's brilliantly prosecuted that exposes the utter moral bankruptcy and corruption and criminality of the guy who's been made the nominee of the Republican Party? I don't know. I actually think that there's already evidence that the majority of Americans already, in some senses, already know that this whole MAGA thing is to be rejected. And we saw that in 2022. And a big piece of that is Donald Trump. I mean, that's part of what we see in South Carolina, where, yeah, he got the good majority, he got 60% or so. But 40% of the Republicans voted for somebody else, even though, see, I talked about this earlier, and I think I left out an idea that ordinarily in a political party, when it's clear who's going to be the nominee, there's a rallying around. You don't keep on pressing it when there's really no reasonable way that the nomination could be won by somebody else. I was actually very angry with Bernie Sanders in 2016. And by early May of that year, it was already obvious that Hillary Clinton was going to be that nominee. I had been feeling pretty positive about Bernie Sanders. I understood at that time it was clear that whoever it was going to be going up against Donald Trump, and that he absolutely had to be defeated. And I was so upset with Bernie Sanders, who kept who who did not rally around the person who obviously had won. I don't remember exact circumstances, but it was clear that Hillary Clinton by then had won. But he was still taking pot shots at her and still keeping the conflict. That also was contrary. I've watched some very admirable people show themselves to be led into evil by their pride and some kind of ego thing. I think of Ralph Nader, who was deservedly a hero of a lot of people, including my wife, who worked for him, and to some extent me too. I mean, he was a hero, standing up for the underdog. And then I watched what he did in the year 2000. He basically, as it turns out, and this was not unpredictable, I actually had way to get word to him when he was saying there wasn't a dime's worth of difference between Al Gore and George W. Bush. I had the opportunity to get to him the idea that there was a great danger that he was going to do great damage to America by going after Gore, taking votes away from Gore. And indeed, Gore would have won Florida pretty handily if everybody who voted for Ralph Nader had instead had to vote for one of the two major party candidates. Not unexpected. And as I said, I got word to Nader that there was this danger. I didn't think about Florida in advance, but just that this was going to be a close election, and he was going to be taking votes. He had no chance of becoming elected president. I mean, that's the problem in our system with a third party candidate. You basically just you're helping the side you like the least, and there was more than a dime's worth of difference between Ralph Nader. Between Al Gore and George W. Bush. We wouldn't have gotten the war in Iraq, and that would have been huge, huge, huge. And Ralph Nader, because of his pride, and I haven't gotten into that, but because of his pride, he challenged the Democrat who had a chance to win the presidency and would have been a whole lot better for the country than George W. Bush, who 8 years later left the country in a state of disrepair that would have been difficult to imagine in 2001 when he was inaugurated. Politically, economically, the full catastrophe, and our standing in the world. It really mattered. And then we got the same damn thing with Bernie Sanders. And after it became clear that Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee, if he had done what he should have done, she still might have won, even in spite of the James Comey debacle. I think that what he did to Hillary Clinton between the beginning of May and on to the convention, where there was still a certain amount of real divisiveness coming from the Bernie Sanders side. And there we are, getting 4 years of Donald Trump. I really liked heroes. And Bernie Sanders deserved to be called a hero. And Ralph Nader deserves to be called a hero. But it's so disappointing to watch, look at both of these guys and how really the biggest impact that either one of them are going to have on history is is ugly because they were led by their pride, indulged their resentments. In both cases, I think that describes it. It's kind of scary to think that a person can be um, so good in so many ways, and energized like Nader and Bernie Sanders both have been, and yet somehow the biggest impact is handing the presidency to the guy who's going to give us the war in Iraq and all the terrible consequences there have been of that, ripping the international order apart. And the biggest impact that Bernie Sanders will have had in history is that maybe, I mean, I don't know exactly, but if he had rallied to Hillary and conducted himself as he eventually did in the general election, he did argue in the general election on behalf of Hillary against Trump, unless I don't recall correctly. But if he had started in May, there would have been a lot of Bernie people who ended up not not thinking it was really important to support Hillary Clinton and keep Donald Trump from being president. Think of all the damage Trump has done because he got to win that election. Anyway, but with Donald Trump, we don't have a good person that occasionally does evil things, that has a lot of good intentions, but sometimes is willing to indulge something that's not so fine, morally speaking, in terms of wanting something for oneself. Donald Trump is somebody who is consistently doing, well, you might say if in each situation you ask, well, what's the most destructive thing you could do here? You get indicted. What's the most destructive way you could conduct yourself? Threatening judges, deceiving millions of people that you're being prosecuted for political reasons. When you practically dared the American system of justice to prosecute you. So many people, there's evidence right out in front of us. It's just more blatant than I could have possibly imagined there could be. And you've got, millions of people who either embrace that evil or can't see what's obvious. And that's where I always get hung up. Which is it? Or how do they work together or something? So Donald Trump has already been indicted by juries made up of average Americans, with indictment papers handed down in masterful ways by prosecutors. The news media have reported plenty of information. There shouldn't really be any doubt in the mind of anybody who's thinking straight about that Trump's criminality is well established. I mean, if you're a juror, you got to presume innocence, but we're citizens. We got to look at, and this is shown as about as close as obviously. I mean, Trump's criminality is something we really should know more fully than we know almost anything else about in our public sphere. Everything else, I mean, this has just been shown so abundantly and so clearly. And beyond a reasonable doubt, I mean, hardly even an unreasonable doubt. Putting together all we know that we've been told and multiple times and sometimes spelled out in elaborate detail, we know about Trump's criminality. But the rule of law is being fought against, including by a big piece of the Republican base that claims to believe that he's an object of political prosecution. And they're going to vote for him to be president. The guy who takes an oath to see to it that the laws are faithfully executed has been shown to be someone who has no regard for the law whatsoever. The guy who takes an oath to protect and defend the Constitution has already shown himself to have no respect for the Constitution. He tried to overthrow the Constitution when he tried to use the big lie to steal the election and hold on to power against the will of the American people. I think that the forces of the rule of law are going to prevail here. He's already been indicted. There've already been juries in the E. Jean Carroll and the corporate Trump Co. Fraud trial with Letitia James. There's already been these huge awards, so he owes over $500 million. They're already striking at him. And it's not very many days before those judgments in the civil cases are going to be executed. And we'll see whether he's able to come up with the money. And we'll see whether the rule of law will have prevailed to such an extent that some of his assets will be seized and auctioned off to raise the money that he is legally obliged to pay. Yeah, I really do want to see the trials conducted. I don't want him to have the victory of delaying things. I mean, he loses all the time with every one of his appeals. They're all worthless. His arguments are all bogus. But he wins because what he is accomplishing is delay, and he's betting everything on his winning the election and using the powers and the position of the presidency to defeat the rule of law from the Oval Office. I don't think that's going to happen, but I worry about it. I'm very big on worrying. It's worn me out. I said something about my shock absorbers are shot. And it's because basically I've been full-time worrying about the survival of American democracy since 2004. The years before that, I was concerned about this and that and this and that, but I wasn't consumed by this kind of real fear about where the future might be heading and a sense of loss. It's just been, so here we are, and this is a showdown. I think we should see it. The rule of law has been taking a battering before Donald Trump came on the scene. I mean, for example, the way the Republicans stole a Supreme Court seat from President Obama in 2016, eventually filled by Gorsuch or something like that. I mean, that exposed both the criminality was already there on the right, and the weakness that there was on the liberal side. Boy, if I had been president, boy, would I have fought that fight much more intensely. I would have taken the damn thing to the Supreme Court. You don't get to say we won't consider anybody you nominate to the president of the United States just because the Constitution says the Senate has a right to advise and consent. That does not equate to a veto power over the president executing his constitutional role to be the one who names the replacement. I would have fought. I don't know what this Republican dominated back in 2016 Supreme Court would have done with that. But even if the Republican appointees had basically defended the Republicans in the Senate with their unprecedented maneuvers to deny the president his proper role, more or less acquiesced and complained a bit, but no, he didn't fight. There you have it in a nutshell, really. In terms of the battle that's being fought now between the rule of law and lawlessness, a vicious lawlessness, that was a precursor. It's all the same battle. The Republicans, there was a study that came out in around the time when the Republicans were refusing to consider Merrick Garland or anybody else that Obama might nominate. And the study showed that examination of something like this is two guys one's at Northwestern Law School. Anyways, reputable legal scholars, and they go through 100 and few instances of vacancies on the Supreme Court. And they claim to say that what the Republicans are doing in stealing that seat and not considering Merrick Garland and not having hearings and all that, it is unprecedented. That unprecedented thing is sort of like it's the way the Republican Party was already becoming, that they already did not respect the rule of law. They weren't as blatantly lawless as Trump. But what Mitch McConnell and his Senate Republicans did to that with that Supreme Court seat was out of keeping with the whole American tradition around that whole process of presidential nomination and the advise and consent of the Senate. A lawless Republicans and the side that had to defend all of what's right about America, not really pressing the battle, not standing up and going toe to toe. Well, that is sort of the same process that brought us to this point, and it's still been an issue. You can see in Merrick Garland's conduct that the liberal side's weakness and refusal to press the battle when that's what's required, clearly. You can see it in how Merrick Garland, as Attorney General, has played this Trump criminality issue. He was reluctant to go after Trump. I mean, we all saw what happened. We all saw the lead up. I mean, we didn't know everything. We learned a lot, but it was obvious that the people who were actually physically bashing at the Capitol were rightly being prosecuted. But there was this whole other level that was quite visible to everybody. Roger Stone and Mike, what's that renegade general who was national security advisor for a little while, the one that Jim Comey refused to abandon the investigation of. What was his name? Oh, well. Anyway, we knew there were other people, and we knew that Donald Trump was right there in the middle of it. We heard the speech. We heard the things that he said in the lead up, the tweets that he did. It's going to be wild. We know what he was doing. We could see what he was doing. It was certainly something that needed to be investigated. The investigation of that whole circle at the top should have gotten off the ground with equal speed and determination as the investigation into all those hundreds of people who formed the mob that Trump summoned to Washington and then sent to the Capitol, knowing that they were armed, by the way. Um, this has been acted out in front of everybody. Um, Eventually, the issue got so pressed upon the reluctant forces of the good side that there was really no choice but to go after it. I think that the January 6th committee, which with people like Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin on board, I think was bound to have a moral passion to expose the truth. And there are others too, like Liz Cheney with that integrity. I think we knew that we were going to get something good from all those people, and they laid it out, and they made it such that the crimes were so clearly shown, the criminal referral reflecting that these crimes are not only committed in front of the American people, but they've now been really fleshed out in some detail for the American people. So there's not really much question that this represented a profound threat to the rule of law. It was a crime of great seriousness. It was a betrayal much greater than anything that any Benedict Arnold or Aaron Burr might have contemplated. This was sort of the utter betrayal, which is why the 14th Amendment really should keep Trump off the ballot, but that's apparently not going to happen. Took an oath to defend what he actually ended up wielding the greatest blow against it from the American presidency in our history. I think that some people might be edified if we get to have these trials, and I want them, whatever they do or don't do. I want justice to do its exposing. I don't feel vindictive against Donald Trump. I just want the truth to be out there and as many Americans as possible to see the truth. And I think the trials will help. But I think that the real work is going to be not just in the trials, but between now and Election Day. The side of the American political arena, not just the Democratic Party, but the whole panoply of people who are arrayed against Trump. I think that there's a vital job to be done between now and Election Day, and that is to do everything that can be done. I'm not prejudging or pretending I know exactly how to go about it. Take it as a really important goal between now and Election Day, to have the maximal impact on the most people in the American electorate, to help them see what it is that Trump and the Trump party represent. There is an abundance of material. I mean, they're not hiding what they are. There are a lot of creative people in this country who can put together something which dramatizes some important piece of the truth. there are a lot of fora of advertisement and speeches and things like that where politicians and celebrities and makers of video and advertisers and there's all kinds of media available to um, get to work. My optimism that we're going to defeat this lawless, ugly, deeply flawed, completely broken, morally bankrupt, sociopathic, malignant, narcissist, criminal, liar beyond anything we've ever seen in history, has almost all the human defects in spades, and has achieved enormous things I wouldn't have thought possible. So he's something to reckon with. He's one of the most important figures in American history. Not everybody can do that, but he's so broken. And I think that the American people have shown already that a majority sees the MAGA thing as something to reject. That's what they did in 2022 with Arizona and Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Georgia. They see that that's something to reject. So it's already, I think, a majority that's going to vote in the general election that's likely to reject this thing that's led by Trump, and that requires believing in obviously false things. We'll see. But that's why I'm optimistic. I think that the American people will reject it because they've shown already that it's something like, I think already we can probably say we got 55-45 reject the Trump party. It moves about 7 or 8% if something looks like this, like today's Republican Party. But I think that that there are a lot more people who, if they did see the reality of what's taken over conservative America, the right, the Trump party, however you want to put it, they will reject it. I think that 2/3 of the American people, look at their positions on various issues. There's the issue of abortion that people agree to reject what the Republicans are doing to us. On guns, there's a majority to reject in various little ways, big ways, what the Republicans are doing to us. There's a majority to be had, and it has to be reached with messages that awaken them to the reality. So when they go into the ballot box, whatever it is that is important to them, they're seeing it in terms of the Republican Party is not, they're having a destructive effect on the things that I want supported and advanced. That's what we want people to think, and there are all kinds of bases for thinking that, because the Republican Party of today is really sort of across the board broken. It's become that pure case I talked about earlier in talking about the reality of a coherent force that consistently makes the world worse, makes the human world worse, more broken, which I say is a definition of evil. So in the battle between Trump and the rule of law, I think it maps really well with a well laid out general framework for understanding good and evil. And if you go to my website, betterhumanstory.org, I define those things, show how they're realities in the world, and justify my definition, and show that it can be shown that in the battle between democracy and fascism, say, which is, I think, one way of capturing the essential thing that's going on now in our politics generally, and with respect to whether Donald Trump will become the chief executive of the United States, or if the rule of law will hold him accountable. Democracy versus fascism maps rather well with some, I think, very defensible ways of talking about better and worse, good and evil, having to do with how the evolutionary perspective instills in us certain experiential tendencies that are real, important, and life-serving. And through looking at those experiential tendencies, I say that we can find the basis for a force of wholeness, a reality in which certain things are better than others, and that the battle between good and evil is something that has been fundamental to our existence as a civilization-creating species, because of something that I talk about in that book, which is that taking the step that our species took 10 or 12,000 years ago, extricating ourselves from the niche in which we evolved biologically by inventing our own way of life. That is an unprecedented step in the history of life, and it inevitably entails getting swept up in a social evolutionary process that drives things in a direction that people did not choose but could not avoid. Out of all that, the experiential tendencies that we're born with that make some experiences better and some worse, on that foundation of the reality of that better and worse, one can build an idea of there being an essential human system of values that's not arbitrary. When we want the rule of law to triumph over lawlessness and tyranny, what we mean is that there is a kind of human world in which the human law, the rule of law obtains, that's more conducive to human fulfillment, people living good lives. I mean, without the rule of law, what do you get? Well, you can look at Stalinist Russia, say, in the 1930s, and those gulags of labor camps and those show trials and the deaths of millions of people. The Stalin terror, they call it. When we talk about the rule of law, we mean not like that. We don't want a human world like that. A good human world is a world in which people, well, they're not getting dragged out of their beds by jackbooted thugs, you know, like the Stalinist terror or the Hitler's terror. Fascism is power unaccountable. And the people who get power when it's like that, when power is something to seize, the people who seize it tend to be people like Stalin and Hitler, not like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, or, you know, kind of people who maybe believed in playing by the rules. That's what rule of law is. So we play by the rules. We agree because we've found a way to organize a human society in which the rights of people get respected. That's what our founders were trying to do. I mean, you look at the Bill of Rights, and what you see is sort of like a photographic negative of the horrors that they knew about in history. They knew about dungeons and instruments of torture and forced confessions, and they knew about kings wielding power against the violating the privacy of people, just soldiers breaking in without so much as having to. For example, our Constitution tells us that you have to have a warrant, and the warrant has to be issued by an independent judge, and the judicial system is a check against power. These are such important innovations for making the human world better. So when we talk about the battle between rule of law and fascism, or between the rule of law in particular, its encounter with this particular fascistic would-be authoritarian dictator in America, Donald Trump, we're talking about a variety of the battle between the better and the worse, between the human world that's filled with horrors and a human world in which people are able to live more decent, more secure, happier lives. I mean, we don't have governmental structures that guarantee people happiness, but we know how to, with the rule of law, we make it a whole lot more likely. The battle between good and evil, I claim, having continued to work on the ideas that are in that book, I claim that that there are two coherent forces in the world that are embattled to see which way the human world is going to go. Wherever you look, you can sort of see these little contests between sort of the best that's in the human world that is trying to move things in good directions. And then there is the intrusion of these other forces that come from other things that are more broken and lead people or institutions or states to do things that make things more broken. And you can find that embedded in the world. And I claim, if you go to abetterhumanstory.org, I claim to be able to show that there is a battle that's at the center of the human drama and would be at the center of any species on any other planet elsewhere that might embark on the path of civilization. There's an inevitable emergence out in that system of two different coherent forces of a systemic nature, one of which is the product of the breakout into disorder, and that generates the destructive force, and the other is the product of the way that evolution has instilled in us certain things that are that at least in our ancestral past were conducive to survival, which is proved by the fact they wouldn't be there. They wouldn't be there unless there were rewards evolutionarily for the species to evolve having more and more of that. Otherwise, why would they? If the only way they get to be part of our inborn nature is if those of our the species that were our ancestors that were having these tendencies were more likely to get their DNA into the future than those that lacked them. That is the whole evolutionary game. Who can get their DNA into the future? And that has a variety of important implications, including that the experiential tendencies that we see in us, and I've talked about a half dozen of them. You can go to my website and see me talk about a half dozen of them or so in a portal that's called Life-Serving Nature of Our Inborn Experiential Tendencies or something like that. Anyway, better and worse is one of them. A spiritual level, a capacity for a spiritually transformative experience, taking pleasure in the experience of beauty, having a sense of humor or at least laughter. There are various things that are there, and it's very interesting. And sometimes I think I can show some conclusions that are important for our struggle to survive as a species on this planet. Some conclusions that come from recognizing that those things wouldn't be there if they hadn't been life-serving in our ancestral past. Basically, it tells to condense it down to I don't know how to describe this level, but you'll see the level of what it is. I'm saying to the people who have a secular worldview, as do I, that it is a mistake to think, a lot of people with secular worldview do, that the moral and spiritual dimensions are sort of illusory in some way, not really real, and they're matters of opinion. And I think those are the two things that I think that I can show in an evolutionary perspective. We can at least conclude that they're there for a reason, and that reason is that they helped our ancestors survive. So we should tune in on those motivational sources, the experiential tendencies. In which we experience the good and the evil and the better and the worse, at least the better and the worse, however we decide to interpret that. And we have a capability, if not each of us individually, then in our various groups, the basic human capability to have spiritually transformative experiences. And we can look at the nature of those experiences and see that they're there, and we can draw some conclusions such as, we seem to have evolved to have a capacity for a kind of experience that's very impactful, that has us return from the experience with some important spiritual truths that we take to heart, and maybe even change the direction of our lives. And somehow we got that selected for. It must mean that the things that people got when they went to that space that you find in cultures all over the world, whatever they came back with must have somehow got them to do something that turned out to be better than they would have done without it. It was a road to survival. That's why we got it. So basically, I'm talking about sort of two evolutionary processes. And I'm not saying that the second one, which has got to do with breaking out of the biologically evolved order, that the order of interacting societies, human civilization. I'm not saying that's necessarily a negative. I'm just saying in that book, I show why it was inevitably going to be a source of torment and destruction, not because of any problem with us internally, but just because, well, we broke out of what had evolved in the history of life on Earth, which has certain properties. And we went into a situation where there wasn't an order with those properties. Nature was always red in tooth and claw, but the relationship between predator and prey evolved such that the two worked together to get their DNA into the future. Evolution created an order, just like it does in us. Evolution is continually choosing what can survive over what cannot. And it's building creatures like us for whom there is a dimension of better and worse, and in whom there is a capacity to have experiences of the same world that we're in, but that come to us in a much more powerful, impactful way. For however that happens, and I don't have any great neurological insights, but people do have those experiences. Got to look at the facts if you're going to be a secular society. I mean, with a secular worldview, you got to look at the facts. And the fact is, we've got these tendencies. They've been selected for proof that they've been life-serving in our ancestral past. So we should tune in on these moral and spiritual dimensions, because that's where the good is going to come from. We got these these evolutionary principles. There's a biological evolutionary principle that produced who we are. And then in the last 10,000 years, we've released this other evolutionary principle, which has got to do with a whole breakout from that natural order and throwing it up in the air, just what kind of, and what directions will civilization develop? Hunting-gathering societies, they were basically continuous with primate societies in size and structure and means of subsistence. But we broke out. We took an unprecedented step, and it turns out to be a fateful step. It turns out to condemn us. By condemn us, I mean make it inescapable that we will have to deal with a battle between two coherent forces, one of which could reasonably be called a force for the good, and which also has aligns with a force for life, a force for fulfillment of sentient creatures of all levels, um, all that kind of wholeness, and then another coherent force that gets unleashed when this unprecedented step leads to anarchy and the war of all against all. So that's the battle that we're still engaged in at some level. I mean, whether Trump is going to be held accountable to the rule of law, it's one of the battlefields in which good and evil are embattled against each other. The ultimate issue in this ongoing inevitable battle, I say it's inevitable. That's any creature that steps on the path of civilization is going to fall into both these kinds of systemic forces, good and evil. I don't see how you get away with it. Inevitable that we're going to have to confront these forces battling in the world, and healing can take place at virtually every level. I mean, when an individual works through some of their traumas, that's healing, not irrelevant. When a family overcomes some of its destructive dynamics and becomes more healthy for nurturing the experience and growth of its members, that's a form of healing. There's the brokenness that pervades the human world, and our efforts to make things more whole pervade the human world. One thing I observe that comes to my mind, I don't know whether productively or not. I know some Republicans who I regard as friends, and I notice that they're continually out there doing very public-minded things, building organizations that will meet the needs of people who are suffering in one way or another. I mean, they show a goodness that's important to them too. I mean, they don't see themselves, even though they're likely to. They'll call themselves Republicans. These particular people don't like Trump. Talking about two couples. But they buy into so much of the falsehoods that the Republican world deals in. They think that there's a line between the party that they used to love when they were younger and the party of Trump. But there's not. But they would go to the polls and support something that's really quite contrary to the values that they display elsewhere in their lives. So I don't know what's my point with that. The battle between the good and the evil it can be very complicated. And let me say that, I did a video earlier about talking the various ways I have of proving the reality of evil. I don't talk about evil people. I don't think that that's sort of built into our society to a very large degree. And I've had this experience with when I had my website and was trying to convey something about evil, and people were saying, that we're demonizing people. No, I don't demonize people, and I'm willing to just forego the whole idea of there being evil people. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that some people will give support to what turns out to be evil, and that is simply something I think you can observe. Defining evil as a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse. But there's a disconnect. that there is this goodness, and then there is this realm in which somehow, that bewilders me, people do not go with their goodness and reject the evil. We can see it. I think I think that it's got something to do with the structure of the constructive mind. I mean, the conservative mind. There's a relationship with authority that's interfered with sometimes with critical thinking. If an authority is acknowledged to be legitimate, then there's a tendency to think it's a virtue to believe what they're told. At least that's one way I have of looking at it. Being a good soldier, in a way. It's not the problem on the liberal side. There are different problems on the liberal side in terms of less than perfect aspects of the liberal psychological structure. But there's a particular vulnerability in the conservative mindset, so that if evil people manage to get to positions of being acknowledged authorities, bad things can happen. That's a big part of the let me make sure that this is not something I need to take. Okay. So life goes on. We are engaged in a huge struggle. Between wholeness and brokenness would be one way of putting what it embraces the whole thing. Good and evil, maybe life and death. I mean, there are two different ways of dying. You can be alive, your heart can stop beating and you stop breathing, or you can become deadened and injured and feel less vibrant and alive. The goodness that there is lies in the experiential realm of human beings. And I think that there's no way you can avoid the conclusion that human beings thrive more in a free society than in a fascist one. And the fascists are also destructive at the level of the environment. That seems to me to be the record. Progress doesn't come from that side. Good and evil, wholeness and brokenness. Trump and the rule of law are part of all that. This election is part of all that. What's happening in Ukraine is part of all that. And the really mixed up, I think, poorly managed situation with Israel and Gaza is part of all that. But a more messy one, I would say. It's harder to find good guys. Biden's a good guy, but I think he blew the play. Started off great. And then when he should have seen that this Israeli government he needed to play hardball with, he resolutely refused to play hardball. As I've said previously, I think that was the biggest mistake Biden has made. And two wise people who agree with me, who are in the Atlantic, say it's not too late to correct that. And I hope they're right. I don't like the situation as it is now. The Israeli government has jumped right into the trap, degraded their nation, and actually damaged their country's long-term interests. as well as the interests of the United States, which Joe Biden and Ukraine has done a good job of protecting, has done a great job of protecting. But I think he's mismanaged this Gaza thing. All those things are part of the same battle as holding Trump accountable, the rule of law. Thank you. Bye-bye.